Do what thou wilt shall be the hall of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Magic in Theory and Practice video. Today we'll be exploring Chapter 15 of the Invocation. So we've discussed much of this in many previous videos, especially in the one on the formula of Tetragrammaton. But I'll try to give some clear discussion of the ins and outs of Invocation today. So to quote the opening paragraph, quote, "In the straightforward or Protestant system of magic, there is very little to add to what has already been said. The magician addresses a direct petition to the being invoked, but the secret of success in invocation has not hitherto been disclosed. It is an exceedingly simple one. It is practically of no importance whatever that the invocation should be right. There are 1,000 different ways of compassing the end proposed, so far as external things are concerned. The whole secret may be summarized in these 4 words. Inflame thyself in praying. The mind must be exalted until it loses consciousness of self. The magician must be carried forward blindly by a force which, though in him and of him, is by no means that which he is, in his normal state of consciousness, calls I. Just as the poet, the lover, the artist is carried out of himself in a creative frenzy, so must it be for the magician." End quote. Essentially, one is using some type of prayer, chant, visual, and or other means to call a force, being, deity, God, or what have you, in order to call that thing and bring it into their being. This may or may not be accompanied with a visual of this being. You may or may not be able to talk directly to it, but ultimately, you will feel it inside of yourself, allowing it to use you as a temporary vehicle on the physical plane. To a skeptical atheist, one might think the magician is just high on a religious altered state of consciousness, and that there is no being save themselves in their being from the so-called invocation, that the result is merely caused by the magician's belief that something is happening, and nothing more. But to anyone who has communed with spirits and etheric beings, there is a succinct knowledge which comes, and when you correctly invoke a being, commune with it, and ask at things you could never have possibly known, and get answers that are correct, and push you toward your true will, the evidence of gods and invocation stacks up very quickly. But how do you get good at invocation? Quote, "Every magician must compose his ceremony in such a manner as to produce a dramatic climax. To one the mystery of the whole ceremony may appeal, another may be moved by the strangeness of the words, even by the fact that the barbarous names are unintelligible to him. The smell of a particular incense may excite him effectively, or perhaps the physical ecstasy of the magic dance." End quote. So experiment and try it often. Try many different forms of invocation, prayer, calling to deities, whatever you could think of, try it. See what works for you. It helped me in the beginning to think of deities as objective beings that communicate easily with the unconscious mind through symbols and images. So I would recite invocations, getting myself into a meditative state through the recitation, and then pay attention to what crossed my mind, especially if it was symbolic in nature. Afterward, journaling every detail of the experience, I looked to interpret what happened and if there was a communication. As I became more advanced, activating energy centers in the body, especially Kabbalistic or yogic ones, made getting into the correct mind state much easier. Also, before going into the recitation, I would look at the invocation and break it down into sections where I would do the following. In the first section, I create an image of the being on the astral plane. In the second, I bring the being's consciousness into the astral form I created. In the third section, I bring the astral God into my being and fully unite with it. In the fourth section, I allow it to take over my body and mind and finish the invocation. This fourfold method is just one common example as outlined by Crowley in a previous chapter in Magic and Theory and Practice, in Tetragrammaton, but is quite useful and outlines in most ways how invocation works. The more important thing to note about invocation is energized enthusiasm. If you want to rattle your mind into a state of ecstasy so sublime that your conscious mind is cast aside and the unconscious catapulted to the forefront of your brain. Quote, "If the magician is still seen standing in the circle, quietly pursuing his invocations, It is that all the conscious part of him has become detached from the true ego which lies behind that normal consciousness. But the circle is wholly filled with that divine essence. All else is but an accident and an illusion." End quote. Section 1 of this chapter ends by equating magic and meditation as one and the same. Either, used correctly, bypasses the conscious mind and unlocks the unconscious depths. Section 2, quote, "Besides these open methods, there are also a number of mental methods of invocation, of which we may give 3, end quote. The first is the use of the astral body. For instance, giving the sign of silence and invoking Harpocrates to crystallize the body of light, or using the middle pillar exercise, are ways to work this method. Liber O and Dogma et Ritual de la Haute Magi outline this method. The second method is mantra. A good example is the mantra for Ganesha. Om Shri Ganeshaya Nama, Om Gam Ganapataya Nama. Using this method for extended amounts of time will invoke the god Ganesha, usually for clearing one's path of blockades in their great work. The third method, quote, is the assumption of the form of the god by transmuting the astral body into his shape. This last method is really essential to all proper invocation and cannot be too sedulously practiced, end quote. Creating a bodily form of the astral light of the god being invoked, magnetizing the body of light to attract the god, and then bringing it into you. Thus, we'll end this video with the closing remarks of the chapter itself about the third method. Quote, "There are many other devices to aid invocation, so many that it is impossible to enumerate them, and the magician will be wise to busy himself in inventing new ones. We will give one example. Suppose the supreme invocation to consist of 20 to 30 barbarous names. Let him imagine these names to occupy sections of a vertical column, each double in length to the preceding one, and let him imagine that his consciousness ascends the column with each name. The mere multiplication will then produce a feeling of awe and bewilderment, which is the proper forerunner of ecstasy. In the essay, Energized Enthusiasm, in number 9, volume 1 of the Equinox, is given a concise account of one of the classical methods of arousing Kundalini. This essay should be studied with care and determination." End quote. I hope that this video helps you with the magic of invocation and theurgy in general. Love is the law. Love under will. Stay tuned. There will be more videos coming shortly. Take care.